Geek Therapy Radio.
Welcome to Game Changer Radio here on the Geek Therapy Radio podcast. And Game Changer Radio is where we focus on more gaming and esports centric topics. The Game Changer Radio podcast can be found exclusively on the Sports Talk 790 radio page, but it's also included here in the Geek Therapy Radio podcast. So if you subscribe to Geek Therapy Radio, you're getting both at the same time, Game Changer Radio and Geek Therapy Radio. I am your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger, and today I wanted to talk about what we know thus far in terms of the PlayStation 5. Sony has confirmed it for release in 2020. Now, to my knowledge, we don't have an exact date for release. We can speculate what the exact date will be, what the exact quarter will be, to narrow it down a little bit more. My suspicion is it's probably going to release somewhere just before the holiday season. That doesn't have to necessarily be the case. It's just, I wouldn't be surprised if they release it in the summer, in time for the Christmas season and the holiday gift buying and all that good stuff. So all we do know for sure is that the Sony PlayStation 5 has been confirmed for 2020. That is confirmed by Sony itself. As we go through what we know about the Sony PlayStation 5, I will include links to all this information down below in the video description. There's also going to be a description link down below for the Patreon page if you want to consider donating to that. 5% of all my Patreon pledges per month goes to help those with mental illness. So before I take my cut, 5% goes to help those with mental illness. So I appreciate your consideration with that. You don't have to. It's completely voluntary. You know, that's what I've said about my Patreon page, and that's just the nature of Patreon. It's all completely voluntary. All right, let's move into the PlayStation 5 and what we know about it, including some things that we still don't know about it. But in terms of what we know, the CPU, it's going to be an AMD chip based on Ryzen. It's going to have 8 cores, and it's on the 7nm process of AMD Zen 2. So 8-core AMD processor. That's the gist of what you need to know about the CPU in the PlayStation 5. The GPU is going to be also AMD. It's going to be a custom AMD Navi GPU, NAVI GPU that does support ray tracing at the hardware level. How this is going to be implemented in games, especially launch titles, that's not known. How many developers will incorporate this? Because here's the thing about ray tracing. Just as anybody with an NVIDIA RTX cards know all too well, ray tracing, it makes things look pretty, but it comes with the cost of frames per second. So I know a lot of people that would agree with me there, that ray tracing, it makes everything look very pretty, but for most gamers, they would rather have the frames, more frames, than just less pretty frames. But I'll leave it up to you, the listener, you, the viewer, if you're watching this on YouTube, if I even upload this to YouTube, to decide whether or not you care about ray tracing. I am in the camp that I don't care about ray tracing, but at least I'm happy the option is there on the PlayStation 5. I would rather have it and not need it than want it and not have it. Wait, how would that go? I would rather have it and not have it. You get what I'm saying. Let's move on. Audio. For all of those out there who care about audio, I care about audio. Audio, it says the PS5 is going to have 3D audio that will be, quote, dramatically different to PS4 audio. I would lean towards this being them referencing some sort of psychoacoustic features, simulated 3D audio with traditional stereo headphones or traditional stereo speakers, kind of like on the 3DS you could choose, and Nintendo DS, you could choose mono stereo or surround. It was this kind of psychoacoustic thing that made the sound appear to be enveloping you a lot more than just traditional stereo sound. I do absolutely predict that. Of course, the PS5 is going to have your multi-channel output. So if you have a receiver and a surround sound system, got 7 speakers and a subwoofer or what have you, of course it's going to support traditional multi-channel audio like that. But I think this 3D audio they're talking about, I think that's some sort of simulated thing. Storage, this is perhaps the most important thing here. One of the most important things beyond the CPU and the GPU is the storage. The PS5 will definitely have a solid-state drive. It uses the new PCIe 4.0 connection, which basically confirms that it is a very high-end M.2 drive. I would assume that it's an M.2 drive. It's going to be very fast. For an example they gave, when opening or loading Marvel's Spider-Man, traditionally it takes 15 seconds. With the new solid-state drive, it's 0.8 seconds, at least in their test. I think that's relatively arbitrary because loading times will be different every time you load a game. It's going to be different. The point here is that the solid-state drive is going to be much faster than traditional hard drive storage that we're used to. I know a lot of people have updated their PlayStation 3s and PlayStation 4s to SATA solid-state drives, but this drive in the PS5 is confirmed it will be a solid-state drive using the PCIe 4.0 connection. That's fast. The drive in my laptop is like 2,500 read and write. It's very, very quick, and I would expect that the PS5 would be of similar quickness, faster than SATA. We know it's going to be faster than SATA because of the PCIe 4.0 connection. So that's great. All you need to know, storage. The hard drive inside the PlayStation 5 is going to be solid state, and it's going to be really, really, really fast. Resolution, the PS5 will support up to 8K for all of those out there who are buying your multi-$1,000 8K TVs, even though there's not much 8K content. The PlayStation 5 is looking towards the future. So, of course, they will support 8K content. Whether or not there's a lot of 8K content out there is another thing, but PlayStation 5, rest assured, if you buy a PlayStation 5, you'll be ready to consume 8K content as soon as services like Netflix or streaming services provide that, or 8K Blu-rays come out. Whatever the medium is, however you get the 8K content, PS5 is ready to reproduce that. It's going to be a 4K Blu-ray player as well. The PS5 uses 100 gigabyte optical discs. That means if you buy physical media, if you buy games for your PS5, it is using 100 gigabyte, up to 100 gigabyte Blu-ray optical discs. It sounds weird in this day and age to be talking about buying physical media. I know that it hasn't gone away completely. But with all this talk about game streaming and downloadable content and downloading games off the PlayStation servers and Steam on your PC, and you can download games digitally. You don't have to go into a physical brick and mortar store to have a physical disc with you. I know a lot of people, collectors especially, like to have the physical copy, purchase and own a physical copy. Believe me, I understand that. I'm just saying that the optical Blu-ray reader in the PlayStation 5 is going to use up to 100 gigabyte optical discs should you want 4K movies that are going to support that, and video games that support that, of course. The PS5 will support backwards compatibility with, as far as we know, all PS4 games, but not below PS4 games. We'll get into that in a second. But yes, all your old PS4 games, or at least most of them, seemingly all of them, will work on the PlayStation 5, since the PlayStation 5 is basically based in part on the PS4's existing architecture. The reason why PS4 could not be backwards compatible with PS3 is that it was a completely different architecture. The games were designed and developed a completely different way. The CPUs accessed information in a completely different way. Red code, completely different way. That's why you didn't have direct backwards compatibility with PlayStation 3 games on the PlayStation 4. All right, so like I mentioned with the game discs, the 100 gigabyte Blu-ray disc, the PlayStation 5 will not be digital only. It'll still have physical media, such as those optical discs, like I just mentioned. All right, the PlayStation 5 will have some sort of cloud functionality. Sony has expressed they are, looking forward to cloud gaming. They are pushing the ball forward with cloud gaming. basically the Netflix of gaming, meaning you don't even have to download the game physically to your PlayStation 5. You are just playing the game. It's being piped into you off of PlayStation's servers. Game streaming is not anything new. It is new within the past several years. Yes, NVIDIA game streaming has been around since 2013, 14-ish is when they kind of started experimenting with it. It goes back to even before NVIDIA got in the game of game streaming. There's been services experimenting with it as far back as 2010. Google Stadia has announced a couple months ago that they are going to get into game streaming in earnest. So game streaming is here. Cloud gaming is here. It's only going to ramp up more and more in the future. You can think of game streaming and cloud gaming like Netflix was several years ago. Netflix used to be based, it used to mail DVDs back and forth with Netflix, and then they started streaming TV shows and movies over the internet. Once high-speed internet became more and more stable and more reliable, you didn't have to go out and get mail back and forth DVDs. So that's kind of where game streaming is right now. It's at that kind of, still at this kind of budding stage. So your Sony PlayStation 5 is going to increase functionality in that arena as functionality in that arena increases, if that makes sense. It's going to be capable of it and ready for it. PS5 VR has been confirmed with the current headset at the moment, but of course there have been some leaks that point to a new headset with more front and rear cameras, different type of controller, but PS5 VR is confirmed, and it's obviously it's going to be better than PS4 VR. Also, the PlayStation 5 name itself isn't just speculation anymore. It is the actual name of the new device. It is going to be the PlayStation 5. That is confirmed for sure. Something that is of note, and that's really cool, at least to me, is that game installations are going to be more configurable. And in a nutshell, here's what that means. That means if you download a massive game, and games can be, in this day and age, well over 100 gigabytes. Let's say you play through the entire story mode of that game. You can delete the story mode and free up 50, 60 gigabytes, what have you, and only keep the multiplayer portion of the game on your physical hard drive. You will still have access to the story mode. You'll probably have to re-download it as you go, but let's say you finish story mode, just get rid of that, free up that hard drive space, and leave the part of the game that you still want to use, aka the multiplayer part in this scenario. So game installations being more configurable, that's actually a big one. That's actually quite a big one. And that is part and parcel with the game sizes becoming smaller, or for lack of a better word, better optimized. For instance, a lot of times what game developers would do, especially in open world games, GTA 5, what have you, they would put the same code, the same, parts of the game in multiple places on the disk, just duplicate redundant data all over the disk to reduce access times, so that the read head doesn't have to go all the way back to the beginning of the disk if you were transported to a different part of the world or the map, what have you. It would say, okay, the nearest section that contains this exact code is only a few sectors away. Let's grab it from there. So that's one reason that games became so huge, is all that redundant data over and over in the game. With the solid state storage now in the PlayStation 5, that means developers don't have to make so much redundant data. So that is going to make the downloads, make the games all that smaller, or at least, as it said here, better optimized. That's also another big point there. That's also another big game changer radio, for the PlayStation 5. That's a welcomed addition here, and it's all made possible by the solid state drive, especially the PCIe solid state drive and NVMe drive. Okay, PlayStation 5 home screen will be more dynamic. Something that I didn't mention, in that because I couldn't find any information on it, and I'm not entirely sure how critically important this is how much RAM the PS5 is going to have. My guess is it's going to have at least 8 gigabytes of RAM. But on something like the PlayStation 5, where you're doing really effectively more or less one or two things at once at any given time, it's not so important to have a ton of RAM like you would with a gaming PC that you might be streaming with and doing all sorts of other functions in the background, other programs open in the background while you're playing your game, and you need a lot of RAM, 16, 32, 64 gigs, 128 gigs. For a game system that's dedicated to gaming, you don't need all that RAM. I just predict that it's going to have 8 gigs of RAM. It doesn't even say how many gigs of RAM the video card has. I also assume that it's either 6 to 8 gigs. They're saying that it supports up to 8K. You need a lot of VRAM for that. I am predicting that the AMD Navi card in there is going to have, in my prediction, 6 to 8 gigabytes of RAM, if not more. But 6 to 8 gigs, that's my prediction for both the RAM and the VRAM. Let's move on to the PS5 controller. I'm going to guess also that's going to be called the DualShock 5. We haven't no confirmation on what the controller is going to be called, but DualShock 3, DualShock 4, why wouldn't it be called the DualShock 5? We do know that it's going to get adaptive triggers that I need to emphasize that. Adaptive triggers. That means that the tension on the triggers will vary from if you're pumping off a round in a shotgun versus drawing the string back on a bow. The actual physical resistance of the trigger will increase or decrease depending what you're doing in the game. That's really cool. That is awesome, actually, in my opinion. That's something I'm going to geek out about a lot. The actual triggers feel different based on what you're doing in the game. That is awesome. That goes part and parcel with improved haptic feedback. Type-C is now supported for charging and whatever else you're going to do with the DualShock 5 that we're calling it right now. It's going to be heavier with the DualShock 4. That makes sense if you're adding extra servos and motors and magnets and stuff for more haptic feedback. And although we have no official detail on its appearance, it's probably going to look similar to the DualShock 4. Another point is that we don't exactly know what the actual console itself will look like. It's probably not going to look like a dev kit. I predict it's going to look... I don't think it's going to be too radical. I may be wrong on that, but I doubt sort of that it's going to be too radical. It may be, though. We'll see about that. It's not going to look like the old original Xbox or anything like that, I don't think. But we'll see what the console looks like. The price is also unconfirmed. The PS4 launched at, I believe, $399, $399, 350 euros, I believe, and $399 US dollars. So we're going to see what the launch price is. I think it's going to be around that $400 mark, though. That's my prediction. And I don't think that's a rare prediction. I think most people are expecting about $400 at launch, which of course depends on what kind of bundle, what kind of package you're buying. Okay, let's circle back around to something I brought up previously in this podcast, and that is backwards compatibility, because that is something that, as it turns out, I geek out quite a bit about. And you'll understand why in a minute. So backwards compatibility. Yes, we confirmed that it is the PS5 is backwards compatible with PS4 games. Sony's confirmed that because its PS5 is based on a similar architecture to the PS4. They say probably not PS3 and lower. And you'd wonder to yourself, why would it be so hard to emulate? Sorry, I let the cat out of the bag there. Why would it be so hard to be backwards compatible with PlayStation 1 games, PlayStation 2 games, and PlayStation 3 games? As I alluded to earlier, it all comes down to the architecture. After the PS3, the architecture for Sony PlayStation changed. So while it would not be hard to run a PlayStation 1 game theoretically, in actuality, it kind of is, because what you need in this case now to run PS1 games, PS2 games, and PS3 games is emulation. In a nutshell, emulation is running different hardware on other hardware. For instance, running old Nintendo games on your computer at home, or running old Nintendo games on your modded Xbox or what have you. Emulation takes some horsepower. It takes not much horsepower to emulate old 8-bit games. It takes a little more horsepower and by horsepower I mean CPU strength. It takes a little more horsepower to run 16-bit, takes even more horsepower to run 32-bit, 64-bit, 128-bit PS2, and so on and so forth. So it takes, even in modern times, to emulate PlayStation 2 games, it takes quite a good beefy computer to do so. Now, the cost of achieving that has come way down. And here's my prediction for the 8-core AMD CPU in the PlayStation 5. I think we will get more PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2, and some PlayStation 3 games on the PS5, but not directly. Not just like you can't just put your PS1 disc or PS2 disc in there. Possibly. I don't think they're going to go that route. Theoretically, it is technically possible to do that. There's been technology that does that in the past, not through PlayStation, but through other questionably legal avenues. For instance, put a PS2 disc in your computer and then run a PlayStation 2 game reading off the disc through a PS2 emulator on your computer. That's been possible. PlayStation 1 the same way. So here's what I'm saying. I don't think we're going to get direct backwards compatibility with PlayStation 3 and below. I do think they're going to release remastered titles from PS1, PS2, and PS3 using emulation. How many PS3 games will be emulated? I am not sure. PS3 is very hard to emulate. So is PS2 for that matter. Although 8 cores is more than enough to emulate PS2, I think they can emulate the entire PS2 library if they wanted to on the PlayStation 5. I believe it all will be downloadable content if that's the case. Like I said, I don't think you're going to be able to put your PS2 disc into the PS5 and just run it that way. Sony may surprise us. If there's anybody who has access to the code to run PlayStation 2 and PlayStation 3 emulation elegantly and efficiently, it's going to be Sony. That's just my prediction. So remember the God of War series. You were able to download remastered 1080p versions of God of War, like even from PSP, God of War 1 and 2 on a PSP. What is it? Chains of Olympus and what am I blanking out on the other one? But the 2 PSP exclusive God of Wars, which are amazing, you could download on the PS3. They even came on a disc for the PS3, and they were remastered into 1080p. So that's kind of, I think, the way it's going to go with the PlayStation 5. They're just going to make more PS1 and PS2 and PS3 titles available as remastered or classics or what have you. Not go the direct route of backwards compatibility. Because like I said, it is not directly compatible. It's different architecture after PlayStation 3. Does that make sense? Really, it's not a change of pace. Really, nothing changes here. Like I said, we've been getting these kind of retro classics remastered for years. So I think they're just going to continue the trend and just start including PS3 titles into that mix now on the PlayStation 5. I don't think there's really much else I want to talk about with the PlayStation 5. That's pretty much all we know, and that's all we can speculate on. And again, as of recording this podcast, we do not have the PlayStation 5 yet. I and many other people may be completely wrong as to things we're speculating about. For instance, like I just mentioned, all the backwards compatibility. We may be delightfully surprised when the PlayStation 5 comes out. They might have a sister board or a daughter board on there that contains all the PS1 and PS2 and PS3 hardware somewhere in the machine itself. So that it is directly compatible. Who knows? I would welcome that change. I don't foresee that happening. All I'm saying is that we don't have the PS5 yet. There's none of us that can test the PS5 yet, really put it through its paces and benchmark and do all that kind of stuff. So there may be some happy, delightful things that I and many others are wrong about with the PS5, and I would absolutely welcome that. That would be wonderful to be wrong about some delightful things. But we'll see. I really want to know, if you are watching this on YouTube, if I upload this to YouTube, what do you think about the PlayStation 5? Are you excited for it? What do you think about the 8K? What do you think about the AMD CPU and GPU? What do you think about backwards compatibility? Are you excited about the PlayStation 5? For some reason, the most exciting thing to me are those, what do you call it, variable feedback triggers. Adaptive triggers, variable feedback. A long way of saying adaptive. The adaptive triggers are exciting me. They're getting my geek bone going. So I'm excited for the PS5 in that regard. But I really want to know what you think. Let me know in the comments below, and I'm going to end the show how I end every show. If you've downloaded this podcast through the Game Changer Radio podcast on our sports station, welcome in. Geek Therapy Radio is the main show. Game Changer Radio is the spin-off of Geek Therapy Radio, but welcome in. Subscribe to both Game Changer Radio with Johnny Hemberger and the Geek Therapy Radio podcast with Johnny Hemberger. I always want to wish all of my listeners a few things at the end of each show. One is to remind you that we are all geeks about something, whether it's astronomy or cars or painting or music or whatever it is, bodybuilding, it can be anything. We're all geeks about something. That's a wonderful thing. So embrace your geek thing. The second thing, and perhaps most important, you're worthy of love, okay? I know maybe you tuned into this not expecting to hear that, but you are worthy of love. You're worthy of giving love. You are worthy of being loved. And most difficult for a lot of people, you are worthy of loving yourself. Okay? That doesn't mean that what I just said to you was going to be the trigger. Oh, that's the missing link, Johnny. You just told me to love myself. All of a sudden, I love who I am. I love what I'm about. And I love myself. I love what I see when I look in the mirror. That's not what I'm saying at all. Start chipping away at loving yourself. Start understanding that you're worthy of love, that you are not some sort of outcast that nobody likes, that you don't think you have anything to offer the world. You have a bad childhood raising, or whatever is going on in your life. Just chip away at loving yourself and respecting yourself. Just chip away at it day to day. Do something nice for yourself. It's really easy for a lot of people to love others, respect others, give others respect, but it's very hard to give ourselves self-respect a lot. And I think that's the key to a lot of, it's not the key out of depression, but it's one of the steps, I will say. One of the rungs of the ladder out of depression is just learning slowly but surely to love yourself. Don't keep your geek thing under a bushel. Share your geek thing with others. Maybe you're really into collecting stamps or something like that, even if it seems like a boring geek thing. No, we're all passionate about something, so share that with something. You never know someone who's going to hear what you're into, be down in the dumps themselves, and find a new passion, a new hobby in what you've introduced them to, as long as it's not some sort of self-destructive hobby or destructive to other people. Don't be afraid to share your hobbies and your geek passions and your geek interest with others. You might inspire others to dig themselves out of a hole. You may inspire an entirely new fulfilled life for them, so don't keep it under a bushel. Other than that, that's all for this podcast today. I do my podcast 5 days a week, so there's always something new to listen to. I just opened my Patreon page. I'll leave a link to it below here in the podcast or on the YouTube channel, or both. Where you can go and subskitter. You can consider sending me some help there through Patreon. And again, 5% right off the top goes to help those with mental illness. Hope you've enjoyed it. Consider subscribing if you're watching this on YouTube. Tell your friends if you like it. Word of mouth is the best advertising in the entire world. But mainly, know you're worthy of love. Trust yourself. Respect yourself. Day by day, let's just work on that. Let's work on that together. Thank you for listening to Geek Therapy Radio and Game Changer Radio here on Geek Therapy Radio, and I'll see you in the next one.
Geek Therapy Radio, Saturday night at 10 on KPRC 950. Or listen anytime on our iHeartRadio app.